Okay, so I'm going to finish talking to you guys about the subjunctive. We're going to talk about irregulars. In what happens in the subjunctive present tense is this kind of the similar thing that happens in the preterite tense. If you remember, C and G have two sounds in Spanish. The C can sound like K, and it can sound like S. If you remember, like the word cinco, where you had C next to an I and it sounded like an S, and you had C next to an O and it sounded like a K. Well, when you conjugate your verbs, you want to keep the same sound that your original verb has in it. So, for example, if we look at the words buscar, cegarse, and pescar, you can hear that they all have the k sound in them, right? So if I were to put them in the subjunctive, let's say I'm going to do buscar, okay? And I write the word buscar, and when I'm doing the subjunctive, I conjugate it for present indicative, the yo. I take the e off and I start adding either e, es, emos, eis, etc. So no matter what I add, since I'm adding the opposite endings, what I'm going to be putting is a c next to an e. Well, that would change the sound from buscar, the k sound, to a s sound, busé. Well, we don't want that. We want to keep the k sound. So in order to keep it, we have to get rid of the c and put a qu. And so that's how we would conjugate. It would be busque, busques, busquemos, etc. So whenever you have a CAR verb and you're putting it into the present tense subjunctive form, you're going to change its C to a QU before you add the subjunctive endings. Well, the same thing happens with the G. So, like, if we look at these GAR verbs, remember G has two sounds. It can either sound like G or H, like in geografía, where you had the G next to an E and it sounded like an H, and then you had the G next to an R and it sounded like a G. So let's look at the words pagar, llegar, despegar. Okay, so if I go up here and I put, we'll just do pagar. Okay, and if I want to put it in the subjunctive form, I change that to the O, the present indicative yo form. I get rid of that and I start adding, again, I have to add E's. I have to add either E or ES or EMOS. But the problem is when I do that, I have pajemos, paje, pajes. But I want the G sound. So to keep that G sound, I put a U after my G before adding my subjunctive endings. So any verbs that end in GAR to keep the G sound in the subjunctive, you're going to change your G to a GU before you add your subjunctive endings. Okay. Then the third set that we have are our ZAR verbs, like organizar. Okay. If I have the verb organizar and I want to put it into the, organizar, and I want to put it into the subjunctive, I make this an O, I get rid of the O, and I'm still adding E endings. Well, you can't ever have E next to Z in Spanish, so when that ever occurs, you want to change your C to an E. So pretty much all you've got to remember is that when forming the present subjunctive for verbs that end in CAR, change the C to a QU before adding the present tense subjunctive endings. When forming the present Subjunctive for verbs that end in GAR. Change the G to GU before adding the subjunctive endings. And when forming the present subjunctive for verbs that end in ZAR, change the Z to a C before adding the subjunctive endings. Okay, so if we do these down here, we've got Andrés quiere que el avión blank a tiempo. He wants it to leave on time or take off, so that is despegar. If I conjugate it in the yo, despego. And then because it's a GR, it's the Andrés quiere que el avión. So if you remember, we're going to do this in a minute, but the subjunctive, if there is want in the main clause, the part before the K, then in the dependent clause, you're going to use the subjunctive tense. Well, there's want there. Andrés wants that the plane leaves on time. So you conjugate your verb for the subject in the dependent clause, that which comes after the K, which is going to be avión. That's for whom I'm conjugating. But I'm going to put it in the subjunctive mood because there's want in my main clause. Andrés wants this. So my despegar, if it's for avión, I'm going to add an E. Well, I can't have a G next to an E. This was a GAR verb, so I'm supposed to change my G to a GU before I add that E. Despegue. Okay. In the next one, it says, tu mamá quiere que tú blank la basura. Your mom wants you to take out the trash. That would be sacar here. Again, there's want in the main clause, your mom wants. So then in our dependent clause, we're going to conjugate our verb for the subject in the dependent clause, the subject that comes after the K. So to is our subject. And we're going to use subjunctive because there's want in our main clause. So if we're going to use subjunctive, we take sacar, we make it saco. Then we want to add the opposite ending. So instead of an AS, even though this is an AR verb, we're going to add an ES. That puts us with a C next to an E. So we've changed sacar to saces. We want it to be saques. To get that, we get rid of the C and we replace it with a QU, saques. Tu mamá quiere que tú saques la basura. Here, mi primo quiere que sus padres blank la cuenta. My cousin wants that his parents pay the bill. Pagar, we make it pago. And again, there's want in the main clause. So in the dependent clause, the subject in the dependent clause are the parents. We're going to make them into the subjunctive. So we're going to conjugate for the parents, but in the subjunctive mood. So sus padres, we're going to put the opposite. It was an AR verb, so we're going to, instead of putting AN, we're going to put EN. But again, because it was pagar, this would be pagen. To keep it pagen, we're going to put a U. Federico quiere que sus amigos blank baloncesto todos los días. Practicar. Again, there's want in my main clause. Federico wants, so we're going to conjugate for the subject in this dependent clause, which are friends. Because there was want in the main clause, we're going to use the subjunctive endings, which is an EN instead of an AN. But we went from practicar to practicen, so to make it practiquen, we're going to change our C to a QU. Raquel no puede encontrar su mochila. Quiere que I look for it. That would be buscar. Again, there's want in the main clause. Raquel wants that I look for it. So we're going to conjugate our verb for the subject in the dependent clause, which is yo. So I put an O here. And we have to add the opposite ending because we are using subjunctive. So there wouldn't be an A here. We're going to put an E. But to keep the K sound, I'm going to change my C to a QU. Lorena quiere que su hermano menor blank bien el pelo antes de salir a la calle. Secarse. Reflexives, you do the same as you do in the present indicative, which means that se is going to go in front. Okay, and then we've got secar. It's, again, there's want in the main clause, so our dependent clause needs to be in the subjunctive form, which means we're going to add the opposite ending. So we conjugate for the subject in the dependent clause, which is the younger brother, so I would add an E. But I had secar originally, and now I have sese. To make it seke, I'm going to change my C to a QU. Okay, so then let's go ahead and let's see here. Okay, we're also going to go ahead and talk about our stem changers, and the way that there's stem changers work is if they are AR and ER stem changers, they're going to have the same pattern as the present indicative. So they're going to have the same stem change as the present tense, but they're not going to use the stem change in nosotros and vosotros. Okay. So if it's an E to IE stem changing verb in the present indicative tense, it's also going to be an E to IE stem changer in the present subjunctive tense. And you'll notice that the stem change does not happen in the nosotros, vosotros forms. Hold on 1 minute. Okay, so let's keep going. Sorry about that. I had the wrong activity. Oh, it's still the